No, they've been great partners, and so every second Thursday, we're here at 5:30 doing a main event. We're always doing a small group discussion over a topic that our members have said they want to hear more about. At 4 o'clock, prior to this, over in the James Crutchfield room, and then we have mentor office hours. So we sort of get input from our companies about the things they want to hear about at second Thursday, and we try to intersperse these events with things that are very like hands-on tool kind of things I need to know to run my business or start my business, to inspirational entrepreneurial journey stories, to parties like last month when we unveiled our 2017 impact report and updated our ubiquitous maps that you'll see. If you're not familiar with the ecosystem, we do this map, and then we do a pathway that sort of puts all the resources on the right part of the path for an entrepreneur. So those are available in the back. So last month we kicked off our 10th anniversary celebration year with this report and way too many cupcakes. So we try to have variety, because both my college-age children were thrilled, and both campuses got about 60 plus cupcakes later that night. So
you still do cupcakes now?
Yeah, so we took 60 to Webster, and then the next day I drove to Bradley University and took another 60 cupcakes. So note to self, devoted mom. Cupcakes don't really mesh with beer, so you got a lot of cupcakes left over. So that said, tonight is one of our definitely hands-on tools kind of themed. We often hear, I think, I think a lot of people when they hear the term CRM, customer relationship management system, and
it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting stuff. But if you do it right and you do it well and you do it at the right time in your business, it is game changing. And so we wanted to kind of help dispel some of those myths. We have a great panel tonight, and I'll let them introduce themselves, but their company names, Multiply, Atomic Revenue, Less Annoying CRM, are all adjectives and words I'd like to, like we all want to aspire to. So, right, like in the growth of our company. So, with just those alone, maybe you want to show up and listen to what they have to say. So, I will stop babbling because you came to hear them. And like Quentin, who's an entrepreneur in residence with ITEN, when he's not doing his day job, he's helping us with working with a lot of our later stage companies, getting them ready for our Mock Angels program and other things that get them ready for their first big customers and their fundraising process. And he's going to sort of contribute his wisdom, but also manage the craziness that Tara and Tyler are going.
I'm only here to watch that. So they start diving towards the crowd. I'm here to stop.
Take it away.
Thank you. As Melissa said, Quentin Ortega, also known as Q. Prefer to, you can call me that if you wish. I am an ITEN EIR and also run business operations at Multiply, formerly known as Answers.com here in town, and manage our revenue partnerships. So CRMs, as far as all the mentoring and working with startups I do, are near and dear to my heart, because oftentimes when I'm going in and starting to work with people, they have yet to do what they should be doing as far as reporting information. And so excited to be here to hopefully group share some knowledge. And I will let these two introduce themselves, and then we'll kind of get kicked off. So, Tara.
Sure. So I'm Tara Kinney, CEO and co-founder of Atomic Revenue. We do a lot with CRMs because we are all about how companies produce revenue and measuring what's working and what's not. So it doesn't matter if we're working with $1 billion size company or a single founder who's trying to land their first customer. If we don't have information about what's working and what's not, how can anyone make a decision? So we are selecting and integrating CRMs with companies of all different sizes, looking at what information they need to know about how they need to make more sales and drive more customer acquisition. And at the same time, the companies that get out of their first CRM and are in the early stages and then are trying to actually grow teams on them, I'm hoping that we can start people off on the right foot here so that we have less challenges as you start to add more people to your platform.
This is actually more for us, so that we don't have to work as hard later.
Exactly. Self-serving.
Yeah, exactly.
And hey, I'm Tyler King. So my brother and I started a company called Less Annoying CRM. As the name implies, we are kind of serving the very smallest end of the market. We're most people's first CRM, and we're normally not their last. So they know how to do it the right way, and we know how to do it the way you'll actually do it if you're not ready for the right way yet. So I'm going to bring that angle.
I was telling Tyler that his data better export really well into all these other options. No, so this is definitely an open discussion, and so if at any point you guys have questions or comments or want to hear something, raise your hand. I'll try to call out, and we can kind of address those as we go. But before we really get kicked off, just to help us know kind of who you guys are, I wanted to ask a couple questions. The main one being, like, who here currently uses a CRM in their daily job, day-to-day organization? Good enough. Oh, this is a solid answer. Good. This is an Excel spreadsheet. That's what this is. Or a whiteboard. Yeah. Okay, cool. So pretty fresh group of people. I think that. Let's just start, I think, by I'll pose the question of, like, kind of when should someone start using CRM? Because I think that fits in kind of with the crowd here. So Tara, if you want to take that, and then we'll actually go down to Tyler there too.
Sure. So I started off as a solopreneur, and if I didn't have a CRM, I wouldn't have known who my customers were. I think most solopreneurs start off using it as a fancy phone book. But if you actually use the functionality of a CRM, it's really important to be able to see when you contact people and when was the last time you reached out to that person, setting up tasks for yourself to be able to say, this person said to call them in 60 days. If you're a solopreneur or an early stage company, 60 days goes by like that. And if you don't have some of those tasks set up to be able to remind yourself of when to call someone back, you're dead in the water. You're never going to onboard those clients that you've spent time, you've already spent hours meeting with them, and they said to call back in 60 days. If you don't have a system that reminds you that in 60 days you're supposed to call them back, you won't. And so I actually, I started on Let's Go in CRM.
Sorry.
Yes. No, it was great. It was great. It was not annoying.
Well, it was just less.
But, I've been customizing Salesforce and Sugar CRM and big CRM systems for clients, but I realized that for myself, I didn't have a platform that I was using. So as much as I was recommending it to other people and building theirs, so I jumped on Less Annoying right away and was then able to be more effective at my own customer acquisition.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it. Like, we're going to talk about a lot of features that are going to sound scary for people who haven't used a CRM before, but the number one thing, the difference between Excel and a CRM is that a CRM reminds you to do stuff, whereas with Excel you have to go check it. And if just that one relationship with an investor, with a customer, you get that reminder and you do the follow-up at the right time, that justifies the use of a CRM right there. And if you're not ready for a full CRM, like, you could, HubSpot has a free version. Trello isn't even a CRM, but like it will remind you about stuff. Just any tool, even the free ones that will remind you about something, I'd say use immediately, and then you can kind of worry about when's the right time to do it the right way. Probably not immediately, but you'll see the value as soon as you start using those.
For sure. I think that, like, the right time when people are like, oh, should I start using this? I'm like, yes, like years ago. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Like, because really the answer is you should be tracking all this stuff all the time anyway. And having it out of your head, makes a lot of sense and sets you up for growth and ability to share it with others and those sort of tools. Which I think that, like, I'll spawn off that. Again, any questions, feel free to raise your hands. And say that, like, as far as like using a CRM to plan for growth, do you guys have any thoughts about that? As far as, because I think when I talk to a lot of startups, I say startups loosely because usually it's one person, who's starting a company, and they're like, why do I need to put the time in? And I'm like, well, eventually you're going to want to hire a salesperson, or you're going to want to hire, a CEO or somebody else like that, and this kind of prepares you to do that. So I'd be interested, for Tyler to kind of dive in on like what that transition looks like, and when is ideal in your opinion, not only besides yesterday to get them started, but like, when to start collecting that and when that transition might should occur.
Yeah, absolutely. So, every entrepreneur has that hard decision to make where there's only so many hours in the day, and of course, if you could snap your fingers and have a CRM, do it, but you can't. So it's a question, do you invest in systematizing something or not? And I'd say, like, most of the time the right approach is wing it for a while and systematize it after you've figured something out. Now winging it doesn't mean don't use a CRM, but it means don't try to set up automation and processes and worry about scale if you don't even know how to make a sale yet. So I'd say like, use a CRM by yourself, don't put a lot of effort into customization and stuff, and then as soon as you figure out here's how to do it, that's when, and in a company normally the next stage is, okay, I can do it, let's bring in another person and see if they can do it. And it's basically impossible to transfer knowledge about a relationship without a CRM. So to me, that's kind of the real cutoff, where if you're not using a CRM, no one else can help you do what you're doing. And that's not a good place to be.
Sure. And you mentioned kind of the fields and stuff like that. I know this is a passion point for Terry here. So you want to talk a little bit about, like, you know, if you are starting to dive into the CRM, maybe some of the things to avoid, and some of the things to be sure that you do early on, no matter what system you're kind of using.
So I'm a big proponent of do what's useful and what's necessary for today, but thinking about tomorrow. So when you start to use it today, don't just upload a spreadsheet from a random source without any information about who these people are, where they came from, because eventually you're going to have 5,000 contacts, and they're all going to be in there, and you don't have any way to communicate with them effectively, any way to sort them. So there's a couple of tricks to that. One is to always use a source category. You always want to know where this person or where this company came from, because as time goes on, you're not going to remember where you met someone. And when you're using a CRM, one of my big pet peeves is make sure that when you import or export data, that you make sure that the columns are the data fields that are in the CRM. I'll tell you, when we exported our Less Annoying CRM, because I had an intern doing it, which is what you do when you're a solopreneur, right? And so we exported, we had 35 data fields, and most of them were duplicates of other data fields, and the whole issue was that when lists were imported into the CRM, no one checked to make sure that the top titles of the columns matched the data fields in the CRM, so we'd create new data fields. So when we exported it, there was no way to import it nicely into another system, but we realized also that we couldn't email someone that we met at a trade show and say, you know, hey, the source is ITEN. We met this person at an ITEN event. Let's send them an email and say, it was so nice to meet you at ITEN, because that data field could have been 5 or 6 data fields. So it's really important that you don't let your data get messy, because at some point you're going to outgrow it, and it is a lot of work and very expensive to fix bad data.
Yeah.
More expensive than it was to get the CRM in the first place and get started. And so most people are worried about whether I'm spending money today, but my caution to everybody is know that if you don't keep your data clean, you're going to spend a lot of money in the future fixing it. So
sure, no, that's a very valid point. I think this is one of those things that I tell people, kind of the same that I tell them when they're like, hey, I'm forming a company, you know, I found this form online that I'm going to use to register as my operating agreement. I'm like, no, stop that. Like, the CRMs are similar in that, like, spend the time, effort, and money to do it right up front and start to think for the future, because it's much better to do that now and much less costly, even though you might think it's costly with time and money, than going back and redoing it later, for sure.
Well, if I can elaborate on that a little bit, like doing it right, some people make the mistake of thinking that means store absolutely everything, and they kind of get this spring cleaning feeling where they're like, I'm gonna like be a pack rat and like keep track of every piece of information, and that's how you end up in that situation where, like, normally, I don't want to argue, like, if it's an important piece of information, store it, but people will just go overboard where now it becomes a job to maintain it instead of just like a streamlined flow to kind of get you the information.
I would rather have 5 good, clean data fields than all the rest of the information. I mean, and that's one of the things that, you know, as companies grow and they get bigger and we're trying to clean up the bad data, it gets really, really complicated. So when we do try to add employees, add scale, no one can follow the system.
This is very broken.
Right.
Like,
I mean, it's
foundation.
just randomly, information's put in. We might have 10 data fields on this list. And then now as we go in, we're like, oh, it would be really great to add that. It would be really great to add that. Well, you already have 100 contacts in your system. And now you've just added 2 new data fields. So those 100 contacts don't have that data field. And so in the future, when you try to sort by that, it's really important that you go back and you say, is this data field important enough to have for my business? And if it is, update the other 100.
Right.
Otherwise, it's useless going forward.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, one thing I do want to highlight here is that, like, none of us are up here saying that you can't be successful without a TRM. There are plenty of companies that get very far never having a CRM, but the problem is that those companies usually wind up hiring people like Tara and I to come in and cost them way too much money when they're making a lot of money to fix their problem. And I actually have an example that I like to share. This is a legitimate project that Tara and I did together. There's a company here in the region who is doing millions of dollars in revenue a year. They've been around for, 30 years? I don't know, something like that. Very long established company.
Production.
Yeah, producing chemicals. And high level, when they reached out to us and they said, we want to make things better, and we were like, okay, how do we make things better? Show us what you're tracking and how you're kind of making decisions and all those things. And they were like, well, and I'll let Tara elaborate too, because she probably tells the story better than I do. But effectively, they told us, well, once a year, we fly all of our sales reps in from around the country, and we sit in a conference room, and we go over all of our clients on a dry erase board, and we ask them how much they'll think they'll sell to each client that year. And then we take a photo of that and upload it to Google Drive, and that is how we decide how much product to produce for the year. And I was like, what are their adjustments? And they were like, no, there's no adjustments. What do you mean? We do this once a year and then we fly them in again.
Oh my God, here's this story again. I think I'm having the heart
It's
attack.
painful, yeah,
I'm
and to be fair, Tara heard the story before me, and she was like, you gotta come hear this. And I sat down and I was like, I don't know, I started breathing heavily and sweating.
But they had 5 sales reps in 4 different regions who were all selling. And
by all means, a successful company. I want to say that again.
It was, yeah. I mean, it was $7 million a year company. It was good.
It worked.
So, I'm telling you, my question to them was, how much does it cost if people don't meet the sales quota and you produce extra chemical and you have to store it? And they're like, And then my other question was, all companies would be happy if their salespeople blew the sales number out of the water. So what happens if the number written on the whiteboard in January, if your salespeople outperform that number? You don't have enough chemical to deliver to your customers. You do not have real-time data. So I asked him, I said, can you answer just this one question? I said, the city of St. Louis is a customer for the past 3 years. Can you tell me how much work, how many projects have you done for the city of St. Louis in the past 3 years? I said, how valuable is this customer to you? And they said, we can answer that question, but it's going to take us a minute. I said, tell me how you're going to answer it. They had a shared Google Drive at an @Gmail address that all of the sales reps could access, that stored every one of their purchase orders by year and by client name. So to find out, they went to 2015 City of St. Louis, took out a calculator, opened all the different documents. Then they went to 2016, opened up all the different I mean, I was just falling out of my chair at this story. So to put in a system for them, it was really, really interesting. So I think this is another important point of that story, was we went through all of the requirements that we do anytime we're selecting a CRM for a company. Knowing that they've never had one before, we're just trying to figure out what kind of system do they need. And the one thing they never told us was that it would be really important for them to be able to print the client records. So they told us they wanted mobile access for the CRM. No one told us they wanted to print it. And at the end, they're like, how do you print this? Like, What are we even talking about? So know what you need the CRM to do before you put it in, because
Yeah.
they spent a lot of money
They sure
over
did.
a year implementation to move all of this documentation from paper into a system, and then in the end, they wanted it to print.
Right. So they could print it out and write on it and then hand it to somebody else to put it back in the system.
Yeah,
So,
true story, true story.
yeah. Do you have something?
Yeah, how do you think a company ends up like that? I mean, I understand that, I guess it's a little bit out of the ordinary because it's a 30-year company and.
It's not out of the ordinary.
No.
Yeah, I wish it was.
Lack of knowledge of what they can do.
But I mean, is it because really lack of knowledge of what other companies are doing, or it's just because of putting their head in the sand, like?
So
I deal with
care?
these companies all day.
Yeah, go ahead.
These are our customers. Is
The
someone
sweet spot
for
for
whom
them.
this is their first CRM. And like, I want to be clear, like, certainly I don't think anyone here is trying to shame these companies.
Yeah.
What happened
No.
is they were innovators in the 70s or 80s or whatever, and they were so successful they didn't need to continue improving, and so they got to this point, except now everyone who likes the old system is retiring, and they've got a bunch of 20 and 30-year-olds that they're hiring, and they come in and they're like, what is going on here?
Yeah. And they're
so-
like, we don't know.
Right.
That's the answer.
But in many cases,
Like,
they're
wait for the meeting on the
still-
whiteboard.
in many cases, they're still not failing. Like, they
Yeah.
could continue their business
Yeah.
like this, it's just that their employee base is getting younger and
Yeah.
won't accept
Yeah,
it.
by all means, that company was very successful, was not struggling by any means, and could have easily moved forward, but they had finally got to the point where they saw that there could be improvement. And I think that I'll transition that into, a lot of what storing this information in CRM is about having knowledge to make better decisions, right? How much to produce, that sort of stuff, so those KPIs. And I'd be interested to hear, like, I don't want to use too many acronyms in kind of one part of this, but there are KPIs and there's kind of the ROI. And I feel like every time that that someone talks to me about whether or not they should use a CRM, they want to know, okay, well, what can it tell me as far as like my business? What knowledge can it give me? That's the KPIs. And then like, why is it worth spending the money if there's any money? There are some free options, as we've said some names of some up here, but like, even if it doesn't cost you, even if you're by yourself, it still costs you time. And when you're trying to start something up, time is a very valuable thing for you. And so I'd be interested to hear specifically from both of you individually, because I think that, my history is definitely more aligned with Tara's of like helping kind of more established companies go back and retool or introduce a new product. And Tyler has kind of probably a different perspective on like what he tells people the KPIs and ROIs are.
There's no math involved.
I'm doing that.
Yeah.
And so I would love to hear kind of both of you guys speak to those points.
Go ahead.
Okay, so the people I'm talking with generally don't have enough data to like say anything with confidence about it. You can't say, oh, we increased sales by 0.5% and that generated whatever they want. They don't have that kind of data, and their volume's too low to even notice that kind of change, or even a 10% change they might not notice. So the way I would describe this, especially to a startup that's kind of in a growth mindset, let's say you're trying to raise money and you value your company at a certain amount. Let's say it's $10 million. Break that $10 million down into like, where does that come from? Some of it's probably intellectual property, some of it's the team you have, some of it might be physical inventory or like the computers you own. But most of that value is probably coming from revenue or existing customers. And that's a lot less tangible than the computer sitting on your desk. What the CRM does, this isn't going to be like giving you an ROI calculation, but it's easy to imagine the value when you say, let's say 6 million out of that 10 million valuation comes from revenue. How do you capture that in a way that you can share the knowledge with other people? You could sell it to someone if you wanted to, have an acquisition for the company. You wanted to scale it, you're going to have more salespeople come in. If it's only in your head or only in a system that no one else can understand, that $6 million is only worth $6 million to you. It's not worth that to anyone else. The CRM, the ROI is it's realizing the value of your company for anyone who might want to acquire or join. So that's normally how I would think about it.
I mean, I think that's great. Most of the ROI calculations that we do and the key performance indicators that we do really rely on good CRM information to be able to determine all of the other things that people are spending money on other than the CRM. You're all building websites and you're sending people to events and you're doing all these things that cost you time and money, but without the CRM, you don't know which one of those things work. So which one are you going to spend more on? And so that's one of the key areas. It doesn't matter. I mean, I've got $5 billion clients and I've got single person clients. And the big thing is, where do I need to spend my money to move my business forward? That's the number one question for all of them. And if your CRM data is not helping us know what's working and what's not, where you're spending your money, then who knows? Just throw more spaghetti at the wall. Some of it will stick. I mean, some of it will stick.
Yeah.
Which is kind of how a lot of companies move forward. And so I just want you to I want you to know that even if you're small and don't have a CRM and this is a problem for you, there are really big companies that have the exact same problem, just scaled on a magnitude. I mean, right now I was just telling a story tonight of a client that has 96,000 records. And in order to prove to them that it was a problem, I said, just look me up in your system. I was in there 6 times. Like, so how many records do you actually have, right? And so it goes back to the keeping the data clean, but then also on the ROI standpoint, is how do you know that how many customers you have or how many people you've reached through all of your other efforts if you don't have it stored somewhere? Yeah.
Can you lay out, like, specifically what is like the absolute must-have data that you should have in your CRM, and then what is, and then what are other things that you consider like adding in, or should you all just go, we need all of these things, we need to track all of this stuff for it to be meaningful? What's the sweet spot to make it meaningful besides name and address and phone number, and when you talk to, like just those sorts of details?
I don't even put address in there.
Yeah.
Name, title, phone number, email. Depending on what your business is, city or zip code or state might be important, but source. Source to me is so critical. Like, that's the one piece that makes your CRM not a phone book and, and helps you know where you met someone to know how to communicate with them going forward.
What kind of activities?
Yeah, I would say I would add on, so emails and phone calls. I mean, I want to be able to hand somebody a CRM and understand like who talked to them last and what did they say from a very high level. And then I would say also that I want to know where they're at in the sales pipeline, which is usually another feature within the CRMs. There'll be a tab or something in most of them that says pipeline or something like that. And I think that for me, even individually, so I don't right now, but previously I had used a CRM just to keep track of like people that I'm talking to. Like my networking was in the CRM for a while. And that was so I knew and could track like, oh, I should follow up with this person in 60 days, I drop them in a 60-day bucket, and then I would make sure to keep in touch with them. So I think that's very important to know where they are in your pipeline, whatever that pipeline might be. And I also stress to people that a CRM doesn't just have to be what you consider traditional sales. I recommend CRMs for people who are doing looking for investment, because what you should do is every one of your investors should be in there, and you should track, when I talked to them last, and what did I say to them, and what was their feedback, and what kind of stage are they in the pipeline of getting investment.
Yeah, and I'd say like when you think about customer relationships or any, good point, calling it a CRM is a bit of a misnomer, because it's any kind of relationship. We do it for recruiting also, all kinds of stuff. But a relationship is part science and part art. The science part, you need fields that you can report on and automate. You need numbers, or if it's going to be text, it needs to be limited to specific kinds of text. Like with source, you don't want every person just typing in whatever. You want to say, here are the 10 or 20 sources that we have.
Drop down menu.
Right, so then you can say, well, how many from this one? And they all have to be exactly the same, else it doesn't work. So for the science part, the part that you're automating or that you're trying to scale, you need that. For the art part, that's all about notes to me. So it's, when you go to a contact and you read, oh, this person has a daughter who's in college, and the next time you call, ask how she's liking it. That can make a sale. There's no way to report on that. Like, you can't report how many people have daughters in college.
But that would be a weird field. A really weird field.
Right. Yeah, some people do that, by the way. They're like, this works really well for this lead. I'm going to make a field for daughter in college.
Oh, wow.
Don't do that.
Just know what not to do.
Yeah.
We can probably tell you more horror stories than useful.
Like personal notes, and then you put all that kind of stuff in there.
Yeah, so every CRM is going to handle this differently, but most of the time for a record, for a contact or a company, there's just going to be a, like, kind of a stream of notes. So it's not, in something like Outlook or Excel, it's just one big field. That's not great because you don't see it evolve over time. In a CRM, you're going to say, okay, I just talked to him, I'm going to type a note about the conversation, whatever notes you want, you hit submit, and it's going to timestamp it for you, so when you come back, you can see, okay, a year ago we had this conversation, 6 months ago we had this conversation. So before you call someone, don't go into it blind and kind of recreate the relationship. You go into it as if you just talked yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Speaking of art and science, as a guy who's been in technical sales all my life, and who's been tracked by a lot of different CRMs,
Sure.
I can't tell you how excited we are about being, using it as a club more than, the biggest problem that I see with CRM packages is having lived with them for years, is, if you said you were going to sell $5 million, you only sold 2, or at least 1 letter you're out here. You said this and that. It's a risk-reward kind of proposition for salespeople, because a lot of what they do is art, along with, this is the address, and that's the last time I talked to the daughter.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's so I think
That
that,
gets you in trouble.
yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm revealing personal stuff.
I think that's a great point.
You gotta understand that salespeople don't just love these kind of systems.
yeah, well, and I think that,
So providing, I'm curious about what incentives or cautions you give to the senior management that says, we're going to implement this thing. And you're going to be inclined to look at this field, and the sales guy is going to go, should I put in a low, medium, high?
yeah.
What are they going to do with it? I mean, that's I manage salespeople.
Sure.
Yeah. So this is huge. I have this conversation like every single week, that it has to be a bottom-up buy-in. So I interview every single person when I select a CRM and ask them what would make your job easier. And the CRM, just like anything else in the company, has to be sold through internal public relations for people to adopt it and own it as part of their process. Otherwise, they won't. So when senior executives come to me and they say, we really need to fix the CRM problem, but our high-performing salespeople aren't going to want to use it, I said, you know what? We need to talk to the high-performing salespeople and see what would make their jobs easier, because it is when the CRM makes the job easier. And that's what we're talking about with Less Annoying CRM. That's what we're talking about at the first adopter stage, is make my job easier. It's really, really hard when you get into a big company and it's being pushed down your throat, because then it really is administration. This is required for me to get paid. It's all administrative junk, right? But the whole goal is to use these tools to make everyone's job easier, everyone's job better. And when we look at key performance data, we're not looking at it as management holding people accountable, we're looking at it as self-empowerment. Self-managed teams need to know the data of how well they are doing so they can manage their own performance. And for small businesses, this is really, really important, because as long as you have to manage everybody, every time you hire someone, you have to have management capacity for them. But if you set clear expectations and say, look, these are the goals, let's set some goals together, and say, okay, well, you're always going to know how you're performing towards those goals. It's right here. It's really easy for you to see. You're going to know exactly how you're evaluated. You can empower self-managed teams. And so that really is the future. Deloitte and the big companies, they come in and they want to lay off middle management, and they always end up hiring them back as soon as money's good, right? Because they've never empowered the company to live with less management. CRMs do that for you the same way they do it if you're an individual using it. They do it for every person on the team, as long as every person on the team buys in and uses it.
Yeah, and I think that it's very dependent on the culture and how you roll it out, right? Because what I don't want to see is companies using this as a club, as you said, because they do, and it's really important to look at that and make sure you're having that buy-in. And one of the things I actually wanted to hear from both of you again, because I think that you both have very unique perspectives on different markets who are using CRMs, is kind of like, when you're trying to roll out a CRM to your company, small or big, and you do have resistance from people who are like, no, I like doing it my way, or I just keep track of it in Outlook or whatever. Do you guys have some because I'm sure that we all have stories of that, and I'd be interested to hear your best practices or tips and tricks to show them the value, like you were saying, of using it as a tool.
So we have a client right now, actually. I was just there today, so this is a good story. So the founder of the company 17 years ago is still their lead salesperson. And he pretty much feeds the 30-person company. And he is on the road. He's a road warrior salesperson with no CRM. And so they've continued over the years to hire other salespeople, just like Tyler said. But there's no system, there's no way to know, why is this guy successful? They could be calling on all the same people and no one would know. And so for them, we rolled out the CRM, we set it up for lead generation first, so that the people who were going to provide the leads to the salesperson could start to use it. We could start to set it up there. But the people who wanted the system, he doesn't want the system. Well, what he does want, and it took us a little while to figure out, is he really wants to know all of the conversations that the lead development group has had with that salesperson after he gets it. And now that he realizes that he can just log into this platform and find out where they're located and all the conversations they've had and every email they've ever received for the company is in there, he's a huge fan of the CRM. And so now he's adopting it. And so now we're trying to figure out how to integrate his pipeline into the system, which is a different challenge, right? Because he's been operating outside the system. We've got 3 people in the system, but he's the owner of the company and the key salesperson. So we're not shoving it down his throat, but we're creating buy-in for him. And we're also not enabling him to be separate. Yes, it sure would be great if I made people do an hour's worth of work every time we were going to give you a lead and have them copy and paste all of their notes and their history into an email and send you a Word document of everything they've ever done with that company. But you can just log in and get that. So don't do that. Don't have your people who are using the system spend more time enabling others to not use the system. If you want the information, it's right here.
Yeah, so I guess I'd say the first step is talking with management. I know that the question is about how do you get the end user to use it, but management has to pick the right CRM. That's the first step.
Sure.
And we're all anytime I talk to someone who's running a company, they're like, I want reports and automation, all that. We don't have that. So I'm used to talking about this.
Refer those people to me. That's what we do.
But so there are some simple stats for that. One is about 50% of all CRM installations fail, meaning they just stop using it. And the other is even the successful ones, about 50% of licenses aren't getting used, meaning that people aren't logging in. You say that to a manager and they're like, oh, okay. Maybe the reports aren't, you want, in a well-functioning organization, you have both, but maybe we should first make sure that people are actually going to log in and use it, and you get their buy-in that way. In terms of how to get the individuals actually using it, I think having an internal champion, if it's the founder of the company, great, but even if it's an admin assistant or a customer service rep or just someone who's really loving it, we normally try to do gradual rollouts, like you said, so one person's in there having a great time and everyone else sees it. That's the carrot, right? They see, oh, my life could be happier, and hopefully that works. And then there's the stick, which is the most effective way I've heard of is your commissions are based on the number you type into this field. If you don't type a number into this field, you're going to get paid less.
I'll tell you, the 96,000 nightmare that I'm dealing with right now is you have to put it in if you close it. We have no information. This is a $5 billion company. We have no information about where to spend money in marketing, what the sales process is. It's not replicable across other salespeople because you have to put in the record in order to get paid a commission. So there's 8,000 new leads in there that no one has ever touched. But if any of those close, the salesperson's going to go put them in as a record to get the commission on the close.
That's right.
And there's this huge gap in between because there is no buy-in. So we got 100 sales reps running around 3 states. Because commission requires you put it in, so we say if you're going to commission and have it be tied to your CRM, it needs to be tied to the pipeline, which Quinn was mentioning earlier, is that it's not tied only to the close, it's tied to being able to track it through the pipeline. Because that's scalable, trainable to other people, and it doesn't mess up our data.
Right, and this one only, I would only say do it in a pretty like competitive sales team.
Yeah.
This wouldn't work with everyone, but one thing we've seen some people do very successfully is that type of thing where it's the pipeline, but they have rules around when you can steal someone's data. You can basically say you entered it in the CRM, but you haven't updated it in 3 months, anyone can take it.
I like it.
And then you're pretty incentivized to keep the CRM up to date at that point.
Yeah.
I think, obviously we talk about like getting users to use the CRM, so, we kind of glazed over this point, but I want to highlight it because it's very important. And, as you said, like only 50% of, CRM installations work and half of the user licenses don't get used. When people are like, what CRM should I use? And I'm like, the one that works, like for you. It doesn't matter, like, you know what I mean? Like, and there are people like Tara who like work with companies to find the one that works for them and help them see the value. Or you might just go out, if you're by yourself and Google Less Annoying CRM and find it that way. But it doesn't matter, like if you don't use this and if you're not subscribed to it and you're not using it every day to put your stuff in, then all the value is gone, right? So the real answer is, of which one you should use is whichever one is the easiest and fits into your workflow the most and that you'll commit to. Did I see a question? Yeah.
Well, I had a question. You mentioned again about the value of CRM and specifically institutional knowledge that's contained in a well-utilized CRM.
Yeah.
What about the exposure of that data to hacking? And I mean, what are there stories, bad stories, and what are the protections about that?
Sure. I think that I've never heard of bad stories, so I'll let them say if they have. But I would say that as with any kind of software system like this, there are usually, once you kind of grow the team, there are levels of access, right? So you can definitely restrict or enable different user groups to have different levels of access to information. So maybe maybe they don't have the phone numbers, or maybe they just have the emails, or maybe they can only see the notes, or even maybe they can only edit. Maybe they can't edit the contact information, but they can add notes, but they can't like delete anything. So there are definitely parameters around that vary based on the CRM. But I personally, at least, thankfully, never heard any like bad stories about it getting out or being taken.
Yeah, I've worked with them in banks and in healthcare, and you've got all these regulations about the information that's in there, so I think it all goes to user access permissions. And now as we're starting to move into blockchain and some really cool new technologies, it's really easy to have a central pool of data that people only have access to the pieces that they need, which gets really sophisticated when you get into a larger company. But I think it's really important because some companies that are using a CRM and it's really tied to their operations, you might make it so that no one can delete information out of there because it's critical to operations. Other companies who are only using it for sales and marketing and customer acquisition might say, you can add and delete these records all you want because it's not going to hurt our operations on this side, and you are the interface with the customer. So it's really important that you do set that up well at the beginning. I have never heard of a system, or none of the systems I've ever worked with have been hacked, or there's ever been a security breach of any kind. But I will tell you, it's really, really important that if you fire an employee or you let them go, cut off that access. Like before you have the conversation with them that you're not with us anymore, cut off the access.
Just like you would do with any other tools or email or anything like that.
Because I have seen that. I've seen people just forget to change the access permissions, and then a rogue employee still has access to all your customer information.
So that's kind of tied. There's I think 3 main categories of how breach can happen. So that's one of them is someone that you actually gave access to the data abuses that access.
Oops. Wait, did everybody turn off their phones so they don't ring in the middle of
This is a
this?
public service announcement. Turn off your phones. Anyway, continue on.
So yeah, one type of data breach is you gave access to someone and they abused it. With that, I mean, even if you use a Rolodex, like at the end of the day, if a sales rep has to know how to contact the customer, whether you use a CRM or not, I think you're somewhat exposing yourself in a way you have to, but a CRM actually gives you even more control than a lot of old systems. And also, normally there's a cultural problem. If this comes up, because we have 17,000 customers, most of whom are one or two-person businesses. We don't deal with a lot of this, but with that volume, like every once in a while it does happen. It's almost always, the result is these two founders are going to sue each other. The CRM is not really at the heart of the problem. It's just one of the things someone stole from someone else. So that's one vector of attack. The other is an individual user gets phished or something like that, where there wasn't a data breach of the whole system, but a user was kind of loose with their password or something like that. That is, with any online system you use, that's a risk. That type of user probably would be even more likely to lose that data if they were storing it themselves versus in a CRM.
Sure.
And then the third one would be the entire system gets hacked. I agree, I've never heard of that. No system is completely unhackable. We see this all the time. But once again, you have to compare the risk of, is Salesforce more likely to get hacked, or is someone more likely to break in and take your computer with your hard drive on it? Probably your computer is more likely to get stolen.
I'm going to touch on one more thing, and then we'll open it up to questions for the last few minutes here. And you kind of mentioned it, and it's one of the things I want to be sure we highlighted, is that we've talked a lot about how CRMs are important for sales and that process, and whether that be actual sales of a product or investor, retention or hiring process or anything like that. But I think that CRMs can also play a really strong role in customer support, customer service. And I'd love to hear you guys kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's one of the critical things that I look for with a lot of small companies is whether or not all the parts of an organization that need the customer data have access to it. And so one of the areas that I probably have the most challenges when I'm doing requirements is the customer support, customer service team. And people are like, why do you want to talk to them? This is coming out of my budget. I'm a sales manager, right? But there's a huge breakdown between the people that are delivering on the promises made by marketing and sales and who are following up to help customers solve problems. And when that data is not connected with the people that the customer bought from, they buy because of trust. And that salesperson who they trusted to buy the product from needs to know every time that customer gets service, or you will lose them, or you will end up looking like an idiot. Because your salesperson will call and say, I'm so glad you're having 3 years of great service with us. We wanted to sell you the next thing. They're like, we have had no less than 82 service calls in the past month. What are you doing? So that's really important. And some have a separate platform for service to access, which I really do find helpful. But depending on the size of your company, that may not be.
Yeah, if you're a smaller company, I would assume a lot of people that use Annoying CRM might use it as a customer service platform as well to track those things.
Absolutely. I mean, the R in CRM is relationship, and relationships don't start with sales and they don't end with sales. They start normally with something like marketing, and they end hopefully never. So yeah, if the CRM is not tracking the whole relationship over its life cycle, it's not really doing its job. The great thing, the reason I love working with small businesses, the solution to this problem that the sales director, whoever says it's coming out of my budget, is for the CEO to say, no, it's coming out of my budget.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with small businesses, the person making the decision is almost always the owner or the CEO or something like that. And they, anyone who has a holistic view of the company is going to immediately understand this is not just a sales thing, this is for everybody.
Right. And that's why I wanted to highlight it here at the end. I think that we talked a lot about the uses of it in the sales pipeline, whatever that pipeline might be. But it's really a far-reaching tool that applies to a lot of kind of the whole customer process, whoever that customer is, and want to highlight those. So, any more questions? Yeah.
What are some new trends in CRM? What are CRMs going to look like in 5 or 10 years?
Oh my goodness. I have to tell you about this crazy thing. So I was at Collision Conference in New Orleans last week. A lot of really great technologies, but my clients are always asking me, no one wants to use the CRM. How do you use it? There's a new AI tool out that using artificial intelligence, you hook up all your employees' phone numbers and all their email accounts and everything to it. And if they get a phone call or if they make a phone call, it automatically logs it in the CRM. The same way you say if I attached a document to an email and you didn't attach something, it says, on that call, you said that you were going to give something by Monday, and it creates a task within the CRM for you to create it by Monday.
Oh my God.
It's a little early for me to recommend it to anybody, but it was really
Yeah.
cool. So with artificial intelligence and machine learning, it's empowering people to follow through with their commitments. And when I mentioned that to one of my big clients, they said, I probably commit to deliver 30 things a day and I probably deliver 5. But one of the things they don't do is put it in the CRM, the 30 things they said they were going to deliver.
Sure.
So that's one of the really cool new tools that's coming out. Then there were quite a few things along that lines that tied into CRM.
Like if I could put something in my CRM, just talking to it, I could do it so much
Yeah.
better. I mean, God.
Yeah, well, no, and I think that, this week at the Google I/O, they announced the email, where Gmail is going to start writing your emails for you. So good, based on what you wrote before, and start suggesting oh, you're starting to type this sentence, maybe you hit tab and here's the rest of it. I think tools like that are going to get integrated in CRM really fast because anytime you're working with trying to close more deals, it's a numbers game, right? No matter what those deals are, you want to talk to as many people as possible. And if a CRM as a tool can start to automate part of that process and be here's the email I'm going to send to all of your follow-ups today and make it sound in your voice for you and stuff like that, I think that's going to be a big piece of it going forward.
Okay, well, we need to let the French consulate get in here and talk about how to do business with France, which the working title of that session was, So You Think You Can France? Which I thought was great. That's how it made it to the sign, but an ITEN company is also involved in that, so we were talking about that. But thanks so much for coming. If you have other questions for our panel, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. If you have questions for them, they will be walking out that door and taking those questions in the hall. All righty. Thanks for coming, guys.